Hello, everybody, and welcome to our world today, the Unionist perspective. Today, we're looking at a very interesting scientific discovery that we believe will have quite an impact on how we view not only what was the history of the Big Bang, but also how it happened and how we actually see the perspective of of our concept of the universe shifting. So that is our primary topic today. There are a couple of others, but I felt like that would be a great way to start. And Yureen shared the video. So Yureen, I don't know if you want to do a little intro before we carry on with our conversation.
Yeah, so on the scientific scene, there have been a lot of discoveries this past few months to a year, because we have a lot of new technology to kind of explore the universe. We have the James Webb telescope that discovers things that are even deeper and clearer than the Hubble telescope did. And then at the end of June, astrophysicists said that there was a huge discovery, and basically we haven't been able to see everything in the universe because, well, light is very dense, and so it covers things that are on the other side of the light. And there's also like the time ripple. Basically, it's like when light travels through the universe, obviously ripples through objects. So it's not very straight, and sometimes it delays or covers up what we can see of the universe. And basically, if I remember correctly, because we can now use basically the light of a pulsar, and the energy of a pulsar, it is so powerful that it doesn't deviate the light. And so we can use these particles. We understand the particles of the pulsar and how they work, I think. Or we can use the ones for the pulsar directly to kind of see through the universe. And the pulsar becomes a direct telescope, a natural telescope, through our telescope to see on the other side of things. And so basically that's it. If we were to talk a little bit, talk about this more on the scientific side, I think like we would get lost. But overall, this is like a huge thing for our understanding of the universe, because we weren't able to see for the 400,000 first years of the universe, after the Big Bang up to like 400,000 years. And because of this, we might be able to see through this. And there's also discoveries that have been made adjacent to this one, saying that, hey, we might have had galaxies way earlier than what we thought it was. We may have like the conjunction of atoms earlier than we thought it was. So the thing with science, which is so cool, is that our understanding of the universe is constantly shifting. And so we're constantly getting closer to the understanding of ourselves, basically, and the understanding of how we were to be created. And I think that's where we can discuss this as unionists, like, for example, first of all, saying like how we feel about it, like if you're interested in anything that is like astronomy related, because I love this. I've loved this since I was a kid. And second of all, saying like, how do you feel this relates to our understanding of ourselves, and what is the message spiritually? Because there has been a lot of movement on the scientific scene, and this is like an integral part of our lives. So there must be something for us to discuss too. So that's it for my little summary. I don't know how you guys feel about that. If you saw the video, if you understood what it was about, and yeah, open floor.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's like it's really cool, and it's definitely like science's like quest for knowledge keeps going, and the ability to detect like basically like objects is what you're saying, or objects or light that were like around the origin point of the universe. Is that what you're saying that
Not
it
necessarily,
is?
not
Or
necessarily
Not
objects.
necessarily, not necessarily.
Oops, I hear myself in echo. Not necessarily objects, but like the universe, in a way we haven't seen it before because it was covered up by lights and particles and other things. Like basically we weren't able to see further than a certain point in the universe, is what I'm saying.
Okay, yeah, so thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, because I wasn't sure, but I think it's awesome though, because science, I feel like, well, right now there isn't a whole lot of overlap between like, well, certainly not religious and scientific per se, like understandings of the cosmos. Spirituality, like, definitely embraces science more, but I feel like that kind of discovery, yeah, it only brings the two closer, because then science can begin to investigate all of this stuff, like the phenomena and everything like associated with like, yeah, the beginning of this universe, and that's cool. So yeah, I feel like it's just another step toward what I feel will definitely be a convergence there. So yeah.
Yeah, I feel so too. I feel like somehow the two get closer and we don't separate them as much as we used to. So I think this is cool.
Yeah, I love all this stuff because I feel like it just like every time we go deeper, it like proves God like a little bit more. Like, oh shit, like there's science behind this. It's real. Like what we know in our hearts, it's proven like physically. And I don't know, because like with quantum physics, it's basically already proven that we're all one. With like because it's like if one particle is vibrating here, it could be vibrating at the same vibration in outer space or something. Is that right? Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, like that's like, yeah, like quantum entanglement, like
Yeah,
scientists
yeah,
can
exactly.
they can make like entangled particles, and they can have like one particle be in a certain state in one like place, and then another place the other particle is in the same state, or it in some respect. And
Yeah.
so that's twin flames. So that means
Mhm.
like, for example, you and me, like Isaiah and me, would be like quantum entangled, I guess. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, also it's
So,
like yeah, definitely. Also, it's like a particle, but it's like the same particle that can be at two different places at the same time. So it's even more than that. It's just like the same thing, same energy, like in two places. And
Yep.
we aren't able to see it yet, but quantum physics is just like going deeper into it. So it's pretty cool. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, I think I
Yeah.
read a quote somewhere where your vibration is reflected in space through stars as well at a particular point. So as we ascend and we're vibrating at a different rate, there's another part in the universe that's doing the same. And of course, that's reflected in our twin flame as well. And just knowing that we encompass all of the universe within us is just magnificent. And getting to know, like you said, more of ourselves and more of this universe. So beautiful.
So what I found interesting about this article, in the sense that there's potential for greater expansion of our understanding of the relatedness of black holes and the time and place at which something has taken place. So what stood out to me is the sense that we might be observing a star currently, but that is almost observing the past of that star because of how light travels and how these gravitational, and I can't even remember what the word was, but there's the ripples. So how the ripples travel and how the light is stretched across time and space, so that what we're actually observing is the past of something and not its actual current state, which tells you just how interestingly the ripples influence our lives in a much longer timeline. And the explanation that I liked from the video was the comparison to dropping a rock in water and standing on so somebody else drops a rock in water at the opposite end of a shore, and you on the other end of the shore will eventually see how that rock influenced the water at the point where that person dropped it, but that you're actually seeing that influence down the line. It's not an immediate thing. And how those gravitational pulses travel at the speed of light. So they travel really quickly, but across the span of time and space, it could be years, millions of years, billions of years. So the concept that we had in mind about what the Big Bang Theory was may not be complete because we can only see to a certain point. And now there's an opportunity to see further than that point, to the almost creation point within seconds of what that Big Bang was, and also that it wasn't one instance. It's literally happened coinciding in many places. So you just see these rings of ripples rippling into each other, creating force fields and all sorts of other things. So I think in pictures. So I'm looking at this and going, yes, the theory of the refraction that some of us would have learned in science, where light hits a certain point and refracts in a different direction, and because that light is hit in a certain direction, some other light could hit it and have the same effect. And then you have this concept that everything is actually influenced by the observer. So would the effect or the observation be the same if you were not observing it? It's very interesting when you start to put all these things together and you go, to an extent, holy shit, do we actually really know anything?
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with you. I think your explanation is great because it makes me think of something. It's like, up until this point, we were only able to see as much as the light would come to us. So we were only able to see like 400,000 years after the Big Bang, because some of the light is still traveling to us, but most probably the particles that were existing at this time are already dead. And that would make for like the observable universe. And then people would say at some point, like the more we travel in time, the less we see. And that didn't feel good to me because it was like, we're running against the clock. We're eventually, the universe is dying and expanding and getting colder. And it's like, ew, And then you have this pulsar. And this pulsar is like, because it's so far away from us, but it's like reaches us, but it also reaches the place where the Big Bang happened. Like it's a direct hit from us and direct hit towards like the beginning of the universe. And we can actually observe it, and we're not limited anymore. And it's actually the thought that we were never limited, and so we only feel and know of ourselves as much as we can see at that time, what you were saying. And it's so relieving that we don't have this feeling that we're just in a dying universe anymore, and that we'll never know about our origin and ourselves. And that feels so good, because it was like like it's kind of a dual way to see life. It's not life, it's actually a belief in death, and it's like the discovery, it's kind of like we transcend this belief that eventually we'll die. Like it's like, no, there's always something else, and God is allowing us to see something else after that, and something else after that, and I think it's super cool and energizing. Like it's life itself, not death, like life, and then it stops and there's death,
And I think it has a significant application for how we see our own expansiveness. Because through the teachings of union and through our own healing, we have realized the multifaceted nature of what our healing is and what our healing requires. And that's that thing that we say, it always comes back full circle. And it never actually comes back full circle, because it's permanently spiraling. And it might be permanently spiraling to a point where you get to a core, or it might be permanently spiraling outwards into expansion and greater expansion all the time. So, again, it's just that duality of a core, but also an expansion where the core is still at the center. So it's not going into the center, it's expanding from the center. So, there's like these multiple layers that you start to kind of unpack, and you're like, this is like, like that shape of a vase that comes to a point and goes out again, and that kind of thing. And so you can just see that there's no real contraction here. We only perceive the contraction, we only perceive the limitation until we allow ourselves to accept and perceive the expansion, and to perceive the actual unlimited nature of what life really is. So yes, we might see an end of a timeline from a physical life point of view, but we know that that's not the end. And we can see with something, this type of discovery, that we saw a point. That doesn't make us limited, it makes us capable of perceiving to a certain point until that consciousness is expanded.
Yeah, when you were talking about the vase, it reminded me of breathing. And although we're always breathing, there's a inhale and an exhale. And maybe at the end of an era is like an exhale of the universe, but there's always an inhale. I don't know, I just had that feeling.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful. I also think, like, obviously the teachings is always teaching us that we're an eternal being. And so even if we were able to only see to a point, we knew that there would always be something else, like an expansion, But having that physical confirmation, like, we can deny that it feels like we're seeing the result of our work in our own lives, So yeah, that just feels good, but it's just a confirmation of what we knew inside. Yeah.
Yeah, you guys had beautiful explanations. I'm enjoying this thoroughly.
Yeah, me too. That's cool that we can talk about science like that. Sage, you wanted to say
Just admit
something?
it, Shireen, sometimes we can be nerds.
Oh, that's not what I was saying.
Not
We
too
are
much.
nerds. I never believed otherwise.
Yeah, I wasn't under the impression that we weren't, but what was I trying to say? Oh gosh. Oh, I just wanted to say, like, I can't wait to see what they discover with these new capabilities of observation, and we'll see. And yeah, that's all.
So the other thing that I found interesting in the article was the concept that time and space is flat. And I'm not, I can't ever say that I thought about it in any way whatsoever, but to understand that it's flat and that it's always stretching is a whole, like it's like a whole nother thing, like, goodness, there really is no end to it.
And here we are, the explanation that time is an illusion. Yeah, definitely seeing into our past, into the visible universe has always been something that breaks my mind. But it's just like it breaks the conception that there is time. It's like we can see into our past, like as if we were there. It's super cool. Yeah. So we might transition into a less joyful topic, which is that in the past 2 weeks, there have been events in France that are akin to like gun violence and police violence. And it revolves around Nahel's death. And Nahels is a 17-year-old boy, who just had his driver's license, I guess, because they just reduced it to 18, from 18 to 17. And he was stopped by police at gunpoint, and we don't know why. And police said that they were going to put a bullet into his head, and so he refused to stay there. It just like drove away and was killed there. And so at first, like, police said that he was armed, and we saw a first video where he was not armed, and then he said like the other policeman that was before the car was going to get hit, and then another video came out, and the policeman was never in danger, but I guess like, hey, post-traumatic stress can always do things. Then they said that Niles was known from the services of police, but it was never known as a criminal. And he had a virgin judiciary case, which means that he was never arrested, never suspected of anything, and so on and so forth. And he actually went on for like 4 phases of like police just like getting these informations out, which could have explained why he was shot. But then it was always like the truth always came out and was always denied. And I didn't know that at first. And I was like, oh my God, police, like, what are you saying? What are you trying to cover? And basically ever since 2018, where I guess the conditions of detention of a gun during service were lowered. We had more people shot during like arrestations, police arrests on the side of the road than ever. And we had more of them in suspicion that people were trying to get away from the arrest scene. And sometimes we discovered that into these cases, like people weren't even trying to get away from the arrest scene. It was said by police and then denied in court. And justice sees it as a grave enough thing that the policeman was judged and gotten out of police services almost straight away. But the problem is that then the media took the side of police and said that it was always these Harab kids trying to do things, and then protests started because people were enraged, right? The 17-year-old kid just got shot and it's France, like it doesn't happen that much. And so they took to the street, and then media was saying like it's something they're against France, like they're always trying to get France to be more Arab-like. He was a criminal, like basically taking the police lies into their narrative. And then a GoFundMe account was made by a far-right, very, very far-right public figure, and it got like millions of dollars of funds towards the family of the policeman that was just radiated from the police services, which sparked like a lot of outrage again. And it's like, I was like, what the hell is going on? Why are people so polarized? Why can't we just say that, okay, this was a policeman, he did something that was grave, and there's something that shows that there is a problem within like the lowering of the condition of having being armed during service. So why are we just like in a war zone right now because of it? And it went to like protests and fires and I guess like shops being broken into. Obviously, it went out of hand, and it just fueled the media and far-right movements from this narrative of like, hey, they're all criminals and they're supportive of a criminal. And obviously there's something to heal for us here, because like breaking into shops, like traumatizing shop owners because you're angry and you're protesting is obviously not the way, and you're just perpetrating what you feared would happen, which is being seen as a criminal and not being seen as someone that is serious, especially because justice has already taken care of the situation. And even though we need to look at the politics about why this happened, and but there's also this thing about like, why is this happening in the first place when it wasn't happening before 2018? And obviously there is a direct correlation between the way the laws were made and how it's happening right now. And that's my question, and I guess that's the healing that we're trying to attempt. There's like a lot of layers, and you can ask questions if you want, if that doesn't seem clear, but I think it's a good base to start talking about it.
Yeah, that's the good question of why this is happening right now. Probably an indication that there needs to be a closer look at the laws, like you said. And I don't understand why police officers don't have this regulation that they need to have body cams on them at all times, so that if there's any discrepancies or the evidence that they need to pull up, it is right there, and there shouldn't be any hesitation to pull it up.
So yeah, that's something of a problem too, because in 2020 it was forbidden to film police officers during service, or it was made more difficult. And it was around the time where like the Gilets jaunes, which is like the movement of national weeks-long, months-long protests were, and And basically, like there are a lot of videos ever since that time that show that a lot of time policemen, they start the riots, sometimes they break things just to get the people to disperse. And you know, yeah.
Well, that's just
So,
the fuel.
and yeah, so that right of politicians that have voted this law in are known to be very extreme around like law enforcement, and they just wanted to say like we need to protect the policemen. And I know like policemen, they do receive death threats, security threats every day, but it seems like it was more to cover the tracks of like policemen that were out of order, because obviously like if you have a body cam during service, like you shouldn't have anything to hide. And that's what happened repetitively during the last few years, is that they didn't have security cams, and so people would record them acting irrationally during service. And so yeah, that's a big problem too. So there's an engrenage of, I don't know if you use that term in English, of like vicious cycle of like, we need to do this for a policeman and then it gets worse, and we do this and then it gets worse. And so it seems like there's no discipline for the laws to be enforced in this way. So yeah.
Yeah, the way I feel it is like there's like an imbalance where what people are allowing and the authority that is being enforced on them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there, because of these incidents, it's showing a bigger indication that it needs to be looked at as what you're allowing in your daily life.
I think there's something in France of like, there's all this thing about like, in theory, the economic laws that we put in place, or like the law enforcement laws that we put in place, would work, because in textbooks about economy and political science, it works. But then you come to reality and it doesn't work, because there are so many little things that need to be considered in between. And it seems like people, and I think I say that from a neutral standpoint, I think there are people that really want for these things to work, but they don't know enough about how the human society works outside of their rich class higher circle to put that in place in a way that is good. And so they see the protest from people as a way to like just hinder them and trap them. And it's like, oh, they're always like unhappy, and we don't have to listen to them and things like that. And so there's a big problem, I guess, of class and understanding of classes that is like not getting stronger, but getting more visible, I would say.
So my question would be, what would be the purpose of protecting their delinquent behavior? Because and I'm going to take it back to the George Floyd situation, that we eventually started looking at how policemen are trained and what their purpose is in society. And so if they are acting counter to their purpose, why would we protect them? Why would we encourage them to act outside of their purpose and their responsibility? Because the problem isn't purpose and responsibility. The problem is when you have to enforce accountability, it makes you responsible to ensure that somebody else complies. Yet, when you sign up as a police officer, you have a list of responsibilities. So at some point, there's a level of responsibility contract. And when you contract, you are actually required to uphold your end of the contract. So what are we contracting with policemen And now what are we helping them hide that's avoiding not only their accountability, but the accountability of the lawmakers? And what in the system are we trying to avoid fixing? Because there's clearly something to be fixed. But are we actually, and again, it goes back to, if you don't accept or acknowledge that there's a problem, you can't really find the solution, or you might avoid the solution because it doesn't suit your purposes. So there's something deeper about avoidance happening in this space that's allowing behavior to kind of spiral out of control a little bit. But then we have to go back to, where does control sit? And what purpose should the system be serving for citizens?
I think you're right, because some protesters, just for being there, took breaking a window or something, it took 2 years of prison, even though there are some of them are teenagers, or between age 18 to 21, right? And so doesn't that make you feel like sometimes when someone lies and they try to cover up, and they go into this vicious cycle of trying to project and blame on everyone in order to cover up, and it seems like they're a victim, but they actually didn't just take responsibility for what was actually happening. It made the matters worse for other people around them. It feels like this to me. So it almost feels like, because during my vacation, I was watching a murder series, and it was always like that, because people didn't want to take accountability for themselves. They tried to cover up by putting other people in difficult situations, sometimes even going as far as doing crimes to cover up what they didn't want to look in the face. And so I'm like, well, as my law teacher would always say, there is always reality is always more imaginative than series. And I think in this case, most of the time, the series are taking from reality, and the reality is that as human beings, sometimes we have this tendency of just making matters worse because we don't want to look our responsibility and our accountability in the face. And so I feel like there's definitely that with the French government, but other governments too, but it's just so pregnant in our government. It's we have good politicians, but they don't want to discuss with the other side of the people. And it's either because they think they know better, because they did studies on this, even though the studies don't reflect what human society, the different particularities of human society, or because they don't want to look the problem that they helped perpetrate in the face. And I think that there's a big amount of that in there, because why would we have this vicious cycle of things worsening? And who started this vicious cycle? Because politicians are supporting almost illegal arrests during protests, even though we have the right to protest is in our civil code and in our freedom rights. I don't understand. It's all that and they are the first saying oh, the Republic, French Republic, country of the human rights, Holy Grail. The Republic is the Holy Grail, and we are stumping onto the freedom and rights that we fought so hard to have. And that's something that I don't understand either.
So something that's quite interesting is if you really consider the core of it, and it's something that you spoke to, is who is actually trying to protect what law they may have inadvertently made, or trying to protect their stronghold in certain things. So let's look at the law around what policemen are allowed to do. At some point, they have a responsibility to also ensure that they don't unnecessarily take life unless it's a threatening situation. So you're saying that there's policemen that may actually be have overstepped boundaries for the longest time that are being protected. But they have the backing of lawmakers, and are those lawmakers trying to potentially entrench their position and the laws that they have made? Because why is it outlawed to record policemen in the execution of their duties? And let's take it to cases like George Floyd, that was recorded by a citizen. It wasn't body cam that recorded the stuff. Let's take cases like these shooters, that there was a story where one person was supposedly had a gun, only to discover in the footage that that person didn't have a gun, and the policeman acted unlawfully. In South Africa, we've just recently had what we call blue brigades. These blue light brigades are actually escorts to ministerial dignitaries. So the president would have a blue light brigade, and literally their purpose is to drive in front and behind the car and literally clear the road for them. This happens in a way that actually people start to veer off those lanes in very unsafe ways when these blue light brigades approach, because not only are they traveling at crazy speeds, they are actually quite aggressive on the road in terms of literally driving up very close behind people and pushing them off the road, you know, kind of thing. And so we have a situation where two guys in a little car were beat up by 7 guys carrying assault rifles. And it just so happened that a passerby on the opposite side of the traffic was able to record it. And because of that recording, they are now being put through some level of justice. And so in the interests of society, until people actually fully bear their responsibility, why would we not allow ordinary citizens to try and keep a record of certain things? Because otherwise it wouldn't come to light in any other way, and it would probably actually mean that the people that get assaulted for no reason whatsoever, or because somebody's on a power trip, there would be no record of it, and therefore there would be no recourse to it. So I feel like it's avoiding accountability, but it's also avoiding recourse. And I think that's very important in terms of creating a standard that must be accepted. Because if we're asking citizens to respect the authority of policemen, then policemen need to respect the power that's given to them through their position.
Yeah, but sometimes they respond to higher orders. And I just always wonder why during sometimes pacific protests, police ends up beating up people. And it never made sense to me, other than there's a feeling that politicians are just trying to say that if there's ever the sliver of a threat to them and their power, they're going to give the order to attack. And I don't know why they feel that threatened, even in democratic countries. And that doesn't make sense to me. But maybe we'll have that answer sometime down the
I
road.
feel like there's just a tiny little core thing there. It's that
Yeah.
power thing. It's abuse of power, clenching onto power, and feeling that power can be threatened in some way or another. And that for me it's kind of the core of it. It's this concept of what is power, how it should be used, and what is your responsibility when you have this power.
Yeah, and I also feel that there's a dependency on safety on the police compared to a dependency of safety within yourself from God. So then when you depend outside of yourself, there's an abuse of power because of it, because of the corruption. And then you allow this abuse of power because you're looking outside of yourself.
Right.
Yeah, I feel like that's a good question. Like why police like often like get violent with protesters, like what you were saying, Irene, even if they're peaceful. And I feel like it is because like they feel they feel attacked, and a lot of people are probably coming to the protest are probably angry, and some of them do probably have like an attacking aura, although they're not gonna do anything physically, but they're angry. And sometimes people, especially like you said, traumatized people react really badly to that, and they just react on their triggers instead of like noticing it and like regaining like control of themselves. Not to say that like, oh, they lost control of themselves. It is how they chose to respond. And I feel like they think that they can because they feel like public sentiment or the sentiment of those like in power is in support of them. And that's the thing, is like democracy like can be tyrannical. Like there are states in the US, or there are laws in the whole country that are tyrannical policies, so like if the majority of people says yes, I agree to tyranny, then like okay, democracy like led to tyranny. But the only point, the redeeming factor is that with democracy, like you can balance it out and you can have people say, no, actually, we don't want this, like we're going to reconsider. And I feel like that's what's happening, is because this is reflective of like the consciousness in France, and how there are feelings that are unresolved about like, yeah, I don't know, just like people like, basically like French people who like are white French people just being like, oh my God, like our country's whatever culture and order is being disrupted, as if like you need other people to like enjoy your own culture. Like if you like your culture, you just practice it. Like others don't have to agree with you and do it. So no one's threatening you, but there's that sense, the nativist sentiment. And then in the outlying areas of the cities in France, like the banlieue, I watched a video and I'm like, now I know the term for it. There's a feeling of like not belonging in France and not being like disengaged from French politics and not feeling accepted or wanted. And I was hearing that apparently there have been like a lot of efforts and like a lot of money spent on trying to like increase ladders of opportunity and stuff, and economically help and revitalize the banlieue, like those outlying areas. And that the problems just keep persisting. And I feel like that's a case of like people needing to like give the belonging to themselves and give themselves the acceptance that they need and first, and because like seeking for it from others, like in France and from France as a whole, like it's causing a lot of conflict, but yeah, there's like a lot of healing to do there. That's what I feel from it. And the officers were like, clearly, like, they all know, like, everybody knows that, like, they have this animosity, they have this fear, they have this like anger, this hatred, and it's going to boil over into horrible incidents like this. But then they don't want to fully acknowledge that that's what it is. But that is what it is, you know, plain and simple. And then the people in the banlieue and everyone, like with like immigrant heritage or whatever in France, like they have that to heal too, like the feeling of like belonging and inclusion and stuff like that. So, because I know that in France, like there's not like, there was like an encouragement of immigration, right, Yurine, like in the 60s or 70s, and a lot of people came from like French former colonies or current colonies, if it was the early 60s, and with the idea that they'd be like temporary workers. But it's like, no, like people wanted to establish a life in France, and so they came there, and a lot of the opportunity fell away once France like deindustrialized, right? Is that correct, or is that not accurate?
Accurate,
So
but more like France promised like these super huge jobs and a lot of like brains actually from these regions came to work here and actually ended up in the I guess industrial task force or working in lower paid jobs and hotels, like not managers obviously, but like cleaning rooms and cleaning toilets and things like that. And so they were promised something. The communication was that they'd have a better life there. So obviously they established themselves there, and it's not that easy to go back to your region or country once you're established somewhere, and especially not if you're having like money problems because you were not delivered the things that you expected to have. And so you have a lot of very extremely cultured people in France right now that are working in like lower paying jobs because they're from this immigration that just didn't have the opportunity that they were promised. So there's a whole lot of things about this, and there's also a lot of guilt that hasn't been healed in France, but that's maybe a story for another day. I really like all of your insights. I would say even my students, they come from a suburb and they're mostly all Arab or Black and Muslim, from Muslim faith, and they feel like they've been, obviously it's like in the households, probably people are saying like they've been like left alone, or on TikTok there are a lot of influencers that feel like they're left out of society, and so no one can help them. And so we do our best in school to integrate them and include them, but you can just see that as long as they don't heal it themselves, and it's not saying that the education system is perfect, but that as long as they don't heal it themselves, we can do nothing. Like it's not going to result in a spiritual healing. The core will not heal, and it's just it's a choice too. But like there's a lot of healing on both sides, and it's the same healing. It's always a thing that comes out in the media. It's like they're trying to make it look like a second Morocco, and French culture will be annihilated and things like that, and that's just bullcrap. But it's just, for me, the spiritual upheaval of this question, like, do you want democracy or not? Do you want peace or not? And I know a lot of people want this, but they're not choosing the right things, or they're not healing at the core. And so we'll keep being asked these questions until this is healed for everyone. And it just feels like a whole lot of upheaval of crap for me. And also sometimes a lot of healing too. It's like even in a democratic country, we do have things to heal, and it happens with every country. It's like always being asked that question. You wanted that freedom. Do you want to keep that freedom or not? Do you want to stay here or not? Do you want to progress or not? Do you want peace or not? And that's what it feels to me when you all talk about like the different things that happen in different countries around like police and tyrannical laws and democracy.
So there's something that kind of just stands out, and it almost feels like there's a collective wound of dealing with betrayal in one form or another. And it feels like that may just be the core wound to heal in most instances, because the betrayal has, in some instances, led to a perpetuation of self-betrayal, which looks like abandonment, which looks like not accepting yourself, which looks like not honoring your boundaries, which looks like not knowing how to even have boundaries. So the core of it is not honoring your word in terms of having offered somebody a role at a job at a higher level, only to put them in something else and turn them into industrial workers or cleaning workers. It looks like a betrayal of personal freedom so that you were sold into slavery. So, it starts to just feel like that the core wound is a lot more related to betrayal and, by extension, self-betrayal in other forms of things. So I feel like that is probably a greater collective wound that needs to be healed than what we've realized before.
True, it's funny because we address this with my colleagues as well. It's like some of them are like, oh my God, but why are they always talking about like white people being unjust to them and things like that, and they haven't even lived the social experiences, they weren't even born. And like the others are saying, well, as long as it's not addressed, as long as it's avoided by our country, and as long as it's not repaired and healed inside of ourselves, to really insightful talking with your colleagues, well, we're always going to have that problem, and people are going to talk about it because generational trauma is very real, and talking amongst families is very real too. What do you think? Like, Black people are talking about slavery just because they learned the textbooks? Like, no, they learn it from their families passed down, and also from generational trauma. So yeah, that's something that is very real. And I think some people are very aware of it. I think the first responders, the people that are always in contact with these people. And it's like people that we don't really listen to because we think like they have like low-paying jobs, which shouldn't be low-paying jobs, like teaching and healthcare, and they're always talking with different kinds of populations, and they see the reality of it. And I've been on the other side, like the high colleges, having the cultured people, the rich people that always talk about human sciences and social sciences, but don't understand a leak of what's actually going on in society. And there's this gap between them and this not listening and thinking that everyone is wounded. And as long as we don't overcome this, everyone is wounded and they're just against me, like we're not going to have that communication and healing.
So that is a good place for us to end our conversation today. We have reached our hour, so thank you to everybody for the conversation. Thank you to the people that have followed us. Also, please feel free to like and subscribe to our Church of Union YouTube channel, and we will see all of you next week for another conversation in our series on our world today. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.